The instructors screamed in her face, convinced she was just a diversity hire, a weak link in the world's toughest military unit. They spent days trying to break her unaware that the recruit, standing in the mud, wasn't there to learn. She was there to lead. And when the truth came out, silence fell over the base. The Pacific Ocean at 0400 hours isn't just water. It is liquid ice designed to strip the soul out of a human body. At the Naval Amphibious Base in Coronado, California, the darkness was absolute, broken only by the floodlights illuminating the concrete slab known as the grinder. Bud S Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Class 284 was currently entering the hellscape known as First Phase. 140 men stood in formation, shivering uncontrollably, covered in sand and wet fatigue. And among them, for the first time in this specific platoon's history, stood a woman. Recruit Elena Vance was not large. Standing at 5'7", she looked almost fragile next to the towering, corn-fed linebackers and former college athletes surrounding her. Her face was obscured by sand, her eyes fixed on the horizon, unblinking. Senior Chief Petty Officer Brock Miller paced the lines like a shark smelling blood. Miller was a relic of the old breed, massive scarred, and fundamentally opposed to the idea of integration. He stopped in front of Vance. His shadow swallowed her whole. "Well, well," Miller sneered, his voice, gravel and hostility. "Look what the wind blew in. Did you get lost on your way to the admin building, sweetheart?" Vance didn't flinch. Her jaw was set like granite. "No, Senior Chief." "I can't hear you," Miller roared, leaning in until his spit hit her cheek. "I said, are you lost?" "No, Senior Chief," she shouted back, her voice hoarse but steady. Miller chuckled darkly, turning to address the shivering line of men. "Gentlemen, take a look. This is what the Navy thinks of you. They think our standards are so low that they can send us a PR stunt. They think you can be replaced by someone who weighs less than my rucksack." He turned back to Vance, his eyes narrowing. "You're going to ring that bell, Vance. I'm going to make it my personal mission to see you walk over there, ring that brass bell 3 times, and quit. You are a liability. And in my teams, liabilities get people killed. Hooyah, Senior Chief." Vance replied, her tone devoid of emotion. The lack of fear in her eyes irritated him. Miller was used to seeing fear. He thrived on it. But this Recruit 104, looked at him as if he were a minor inconvenience, like a fly on a windshield. "Drop," Miller commanded. Vance dropped to the push-up position. "Push 'em out until I get tired," Miller said, crossing his arms. Vance began. Her form was perfect. Chest to deck, full lockout. 1, 2, 3. Miller watched her. He expected her to falter after 50. Most of the fresh recruits were already exhausted from the surf torture earlier that morning. But Vance kept a rhythm that was almost mechanical. 60. 70. 80. The other recruits were watching from the corner of their eyes. They were suffering cold and miserable, but the sight of the woman holding her own against the Senior Chief gave them a strange jolt of energy. "Recover!" Miller barked, annoyed that she hadn't collapsed. Vance sprang to her feet. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't shaking. "Get in the surf!" Miller screamed at the entire class. "Everyone wet and sandy. Go!" The class stampeded toward the black, crashing waves. Vance ran in the middle of the pack. As the freezing water hit them, locking up their lungs, she didn't gasp. She waded in until the water was at her chest, linking arms with the men beside her. To her left was a young recruit named Jacobs. He was shaking violently, his lips blue. Hypothermia was creeping in. "Stay with it, Jacobs," Vance whispered, her voice cutting through the roar of the surf. "Mind over matter. The pain is just a signal. Ignore it." Jacobs looked at her shocked. I can't feel my legs. You don't need to feel them to use them, Vance said. Lean on me. I've got you. Miller watched from the shore, his arms crossed, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand. He turned to Instructor Davies, a younger SEAL standing beside him. She's going to break, Miller muttered. Give it 2 days. The cold gets everyone eventually, especially the tourists. Davies looked at Miller, then back at Vance in the water. I don't know, Chief. Her file is redacted, all of it. We don't even know where she transferred from. Personnel just said fleet transfer. Miller scoffed. Redacted means she's some admiral's niece, or she pushed paper at the Pentagon and pulled strings to get a shot at the Trident. It doesn't matter. The ocean doesn't care who your daddy is. By Friday, she'll be gone. But Miller was wrong. The ocean didn't care who her father was, but the ocean seemed to know who she was, because Eleanor Vance wasn't a transfer from the Pentagon, and she certainly wasn't a tourist. By Wednesday of Hell Week, the class had slept a total of 2 hours. Hallucinations were setting in. Men were seeing monsters in the waves and hearing their mothers calling them from the sand dunes. The herd had thinned. Of the original 140, only 60 remained. The bell had been ringing constantly, a funeral toll for dreams. But Recruit Vance was still there. She looked haggard, her face drawn, bruises forming dark clouds under her eyes. But her movement was efficient. She never wasted energy. When the instructors weren't looking, she was helping others fixing a strap for a recruit with numb fingers, whispering tactical advice on how to carry the boats to distribute the weight better. Miller had escalated his torment. He had singled her out for extra, remedial PT. When the class did 10 reps, Vance did 20. When the class ran 3 miles, Vance ran 4 carrying a sandbag. He wanted her to quit. It had become an obsession. Her presence challenged his entire worldview, and her refusal to break felt like a personal insult. The sun was high and brutal on the obstacle course. The recruits were running the O course, a nightmare of high walls, cargo nets, and ropes. Vance! Miller shouted. Front of the line. Vance jogged forward, covered in mud. You're slowing down, Vance. Miller lied. You're dragging this class down. You want to prove you belong. Beat the course record. Right now. Or drop from my class. The class went silent. The course record was held by an instructor set 5 years ago. It was an impossible demand for a recruit in the middle of Hell Week. Senior Chief with respect. Instructor Davies interjected quietly. She's been awake for 3 days. That's dangerous. Shut up, Davies, Miller snapped. He looked at Vance. Well, do you want to ring the bell, or do you want to die on this course? Vance looked up at the towering cargo net. She adjusted her gloves. She took a breath. Ready, Senior Chief, she said calmly. Miller blew the whistle. Vance exploded off the line. It wasn't the frantic energy of a desperate recruit. It was the precision of a master. She didn't climb the obstacles. She flowed over them. She took the Weaver a brutal series of wooden beams with a rhythm that baffled the onlookers. She moved like water. She hit the rope climb. Her arms should have been jelly. Her grip should have failed. But she ascended hand over hand, her legs locking perfectly, reaching the top and sliding down in seconds. As she crossed the finish line, Davies checked the stopwatch. His eyes went wide. Time, Miller demanded. 6 minutes flat, Davies whispered. Miller froze. That wasn't just fast. That was professional level. That was operator level. Vance stood up, chest heaving, wiping mud from her eyes. She looked at Miller. There was no arrogance, just a cold, hard stare. Miller felt a flicker of doubt, but his ego crushed it instantly. You missed a touch on the top of the cargo net, he lied. Fail. Do it again. The other recruits groaned. It was a blatant lie. Everyone had seen her clear it. Senior Chief Jacobs started to protest. "Silence!" Miller roared. "She does it again, and if she fails, the whole class pays." Vance didn't argue. She didn't complain. She simply turned around and walked back to the start line. But as she passed Miller, she stopped. "Senior Chief Miller," she said, her voice low. "Check your 6. Miller frowned. "What did you say to me?" "You're standing in the kill zone of the Sniper Tower simulation," she said, nodding slightly toward the training tower to the left. "If this were a live fire exercise, you'd be dead." Miller blinked, looking at the tower. She was right. He was standing in the open, perfectly framed by the window. "Get on the course, recruit!" Miller screamed, his face turning red. "Don't you tell me about kill zones. I was hunting insurgents in Fallujah while you were playing with Barbie dolls." Vance turned and ran the course again. She was slower this time, her body failing, but she finished. She collapsed at the end, vomiting bile into the sand. Miller stood over her, a cruel smile on his face. "Weak," he spat. "You're weak, Vance. You have heart, I'll give you that. But you don't have the killer instinct. You don't have the beast inside. You're just a girl trying to play soldier." He leaned down. "Quit. Save yourself the embarrassment. You'll never lead men. You'll never be a SEAL." Vance looked up from the sand. Her eyes had changed. The exhaustion was there, but something else had ignited behind the iris. It was the look of a predator that had decided to stop playing with its food. "Is that a promise, Senior Chief?" she whispered. "That's a fact," Miller said. "Fall in," Miller shouted to the class. "Get to the mess hall. Vance, you stay. You're going to clean the grinder with a toothbrush until I get back." As the class shuffled away, casting worried glances at Vance, Instructor Davies lingered. "Chief, you're pushing it," Davies warned. "If the captain sees this—" "The captain isn't here," Miller snapped. "I run this phase, and I say she breaks tonight." But that night the training schedule shifted. The climax of the week was a massive tactical simulation involving Red Cell, a group of instructors acting as terrorists who would ambush the exhausted recruits to test their leadership under fire. Usually the recruits were given rubber rifles. The instructors used sim rounds, paint bullets that hurt like hell. Miller decided he would lead the Red Cell team. And he decided that tonight he wasn't just going to ambush the squad. He was going to humiliate Recruit Vance in a simulated hostage rescue scenario. He gathered his instructor team in the armory. "We hit them at the boneyard. I want flashbangs. I want chaos. And I want Vance isolated. We take her prisoner, and we make her beg for mercy on the radio so the whole class hears it." It was cruel. It was bordering on hazing. But Miller was blinded by his need to be right. He didn't know that the woman he was planning to ambush had written the Navy's current manual on counterinsurgency hostage rescue. He didn't know that 3 years ago in a classified location in Syria, Elena Vance Code, unnoticed Sidewinder, had single-handedly breached a compound and neutralized 6 high-value targets to rescue a downed pilot. He didn't know he was about to go to war with a ghost. The Boneyard was a sprawling training complex on the far side of the base, a labyrinth of rusted shipping containers, wrecked fuselage, and kill houses designed to mimic the chaotic urban environments of war zones. The fog had rolled in off the Pacific, thick and suffocating, reducing visibility to less than 5 feet. The exhausted recruits of Class 284 huddled in the mud near the entrance. They were unarmed, carrying only their heavy rubber training rifles. Their objective was simple: survive the extraction point. Senior Chief Miller and his Red Cell team of 6 instructors were already inside, armed with high-velocity sim munition rifles. Miller adjusted his night vision goggles, a predatory grin hidden by the darkness. "Listen up," Miller whispered into his comms. "We split them up. Use flashbangs to disorient. I want panic. And remember, the target is Vance. I want her isolated in Sector 4. Bag her and drag her to the roof. Over." "Copy that, Chief," came the replies. The ambush began with a deafening bang. 3 flashbangs detonated simultaneously near the recruit formation. White light seared their retinas, followed by the stinging impact of paint rounds. "Contact front! Contact front!" screamed Jacobs, diving behind a tire wall. Chaos erupted. The recruits, sleep-deprived and terrified, scattered. They were fish in a barrel. Miller's team moved in, picking them off one by one, shouting insults, creating the fog of war. Miller moved toward Sector 4, where he had seen Vance run. He signaled 2 of his men, Davies and a burly instructor named Thompson, to flank the shipping container she had ducked behind. "Flush her out," Miller ordered. Thompson kicked the door open and tossed a banger inside. Boom! They stormed the room. "Clear," Thompson yelled. He sounded confused. Miller walked in. The room was empty. There was no back exit, just a small ventilation window, high up on the wall, barely 12 inches wide. "Where is she?" Miller growled. "She couldn't have fit through there." Suddenly Miller's earpiece crackled. It was Thompson who had stepped back outside to secure the perimeter. "Chief, I see movement on the clec." Click. Static. "Thompson." Miller barked. "Report." Silence. "Davies on me." Miller hissed, swinging his rifle up. "Thompson is down. She's playing games." They moved into the alleyway between the containers. The fog was swirling unnaturally. Miller felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. This didn't feel like a training exercise anymore. The silence was too heavy. They found Thompson 5 meters away. He wasn't injured, but he was unconscious. He had been choked out, zip-tied with his own restraints, and dragged into the shadows. His rifle was gone. "What the hell?" Davies whispered, his voice trembling. "She's a recruit, Chief. How did she—" "She got lucky," Miller snapped, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "She stole his weapon. She's armed now. Rules of engagement shifted. Light her up." Miller and Davies moved back to back, sweeping the area. They were the hunters, the apex predators of the Navy. But they couldn't see anything. Then the lights in the sector died. Someone had cut the master power to the kill house. Absolute darkness. "Night vision," Miller commanded. He flipped his goggles down. The world turned green and grainy. He saw a heat signature move across the roof of the container above them. Fast. Impossibly fast. "Contact above," Miller fired 3 rounds. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The figure vanished. Suddenly Davies grunted. Miller spun around. Davies was gone. "Davies!" "Chief!" Davies' voice came from the radio, weak and gasping. She's everywhere. She took my comms. She's right behind." The radio cut dead. Miller was alone. The senior chief, the master of the grinder, was standing alone in the dark, sweating profusely. He was being dismantled by a woman who had been awake for 4 days and had just swum 5 miles. He backed into a corner, his rifle raised. "Come out, Vance. This ends now. You think this impresses me. You're just a—" A shadow dropped from the ceiling, rafters directly above him. It didn't make a sound. Before Miller could pull the trigger, a boot kicked the barrel of his rifle, sending it skittering across the concrete. Miller reached for his sidearm, but a hand clamped onto his wrist with the force of a hydraulic press. He was spun around his arm, twisted behind his back, in a bone-creaking Kimura lock. He was slammed face-first into the wall. "Yield!" a voice whispered in his ear. It wasn't the voice of Recruit Vance. It was a voice of absolute command, cold as the grave. "Screw you!" Miller shouted, trying to buck her off. She swept his legs, driving him into the dirt. In one fluid motion, she stripped the magazine from his pistol. ejected the chambered round, and disassembled the slide, tossing the pieces into the dark. She had her knee on his neck. Miller couldn't breathe. He tapped the ground frantically. "Yield!" she repeated. "I yield! I yield!" Miller choked out. The pressure released. Miller gasped for air, rolling over coughing. He looked up. Vance stood over him. She wasn't panting. She held Thompson's rifle in a low ready position, her finger indexed safely along the frame. In the green glow of the emergency lights that flickered back on, she looked terrifying. "End exercise," she said. Her voice boomed through the complex. Suddenly, the floodlights of the boneyard blazed to life, blinding Miller. From the main entrance, a black SUV rolled up. The doors opened. Captain Harrison, the commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center, stepped out. He was flanked by 2 Master Chiefs. Miller scrambled to his feet, trying to regain his dignity. Captain Recruit Vance assaulted an instructor. "She went rogue. I want her court-martialed immediately." Captain Harrison didn't look at Miller. He walked straight to Vance. Miller watched, confused. "Captain Shea." Captain Harrison stopped in front of Vance. He stood tall and snapped a crisp salute. "Commander," the captain said respectfully. Miller's blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Commander Vance didn't salute back immediately. She handed Thompson's rifle to one of the Master Chiefs. She reached into her wet sandy pocket and pulled out a small waterproof pouch. She opened it and pinned a device onto her collar. It was the insignia of a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, and above her left breast pocket she pinned the trident. But it wasn't just a standard trident. It was gold-worn and backed by a rack of ribbons that included the Navy Cross and 2 Purple Hearts. She returned the captain's salute. "At ease, Captain." She turned slowly to face Miller. The senior chief felt his knees buckle. He wasn't looking at a recruit. He was looking at a legend. "Lieutenant Commander Elena Vance," she said, her voice cutting through the silent air. "Former squadron commander of DevGru Red Team, current tactical advisor to the Joint Chiefs." The silence in the boneyard was heavy enough to crush a man. The other recruits who had gathered around watched with their mouths open. Jacobs looked like he was seeing a ghost. "I heard reports," Vance said, stepping closer to Miller. "Reports that the training standards at this command had shifted, that we were focusing on hazing rather than war fighting. That ego had replaced ethos." She looked down at the disassembled pistol on the ground. "You told me I didn't have the killer instinct, Senior Chief. You told me I was a liability." She leaned in, her eyes boring into his soul. "I have killed men in rooms darker than this, Miller. I have led teams into valleys you wouldn't dare fly over. And I did it while men like you were safe in your bunks, dreaming about how tough you are." Miller was pale. He couldn't speak. "You failed," she said softly. "You didn't fail to break me. You failed to lead them." She gestured to the stunned recruits. "You made yourself the enemy instead of preparing them for the real one." The following morning, the sun rose over Coronado, bathing the grinder in golden light. But the atmosphere had shifted fundamentally. Senior Chief Miller was gone. He had been relieved of duty pending an investigation and reassigned to a desk job in logistics in Alaska, as far away from a SEAL platoon as the Navy could send him. Class 284 stood in formation. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they stood taller than they ever had before. Lieutenant Commander Vance stood at the podium. She had showered and changed into her dress whites, her gold wings gleaming in the sun. She looked regal, a sharp contrast to the sandy recruit they had dragged through the surf for 4 days. "Recover," she commanded. The class moved to the position of parade rest. "Some of you are confused," Vance began, her voice amplified across the asphalt. You feel betrayed. You think I lied to you. She paced the stage. I did lie. I am not a recruit. I am not new to this community. But the test you went through, that was real. She stopped and looked at Jacobs, then scanned the faces of the other men. I came here undercover because the Brotherhood is under attack. Not from the media, not from politicians, but from within. When we allow arrogance to dictate our training, we die. When we underestimate a warrior because of their gender or their background or their size, we create blind spots. And in our line of work, blind spots get your teammates killed. She walked down the steps, moving into the ranks. She stopped in front of Jacobs. Jacobs, she said. Mom, Jacobs barked. On Tuesday night in the surf zone, you wanted to quit. Do you remember what I told you? Yes, Mom. You said the pain is just a signal. You said to lean on you. Vance nodded. That is the only lesson that matters. The trident isn't about being the toughest man in the bar. It isn't about how many push-ups you can do. It is about the person next to you. It is about the absolute unwavering commitment that you will die before you let your brother or sister fall. She turned to address the whole class. Senior Chief Miller forgot that. He thought the trident belonged to him. It does not. It belongs to the mission. She paused, letting the words sink in. I am returning to Washington tonight. My assessment of this class will be submitted to the Admiral. I have recommended that despite the irregularities of this week, Class 284 proceeds to second phase. A collective breath was released. They weren't being dropped. But, Vance raised a finger. Do not think for a second that it gets easier. You have seen what a Tier 1 operator looks like. You have seen the standard. If you want to wear this pin, she tapped her gold trident. You have to be better than Miller. You have to be better than me. She looked at them with a rare, genuine smile. Prove him wrong. Prove me right. Earn your seat at the table. Who ya, Commander? The class roared a sound of pure thunder. Vance walked back to the waiting staff car. Instructor Davies, who had taken over the class, opened the door for her. Commander, Davies said, looking shaken but respectful. I didn't know. I know you didn't. Davies, Vance said, pausing before getting in. You have good instincts. You tried to rein Miller in. Keep doing that. Integrity is heavy, but you have to carry it. Yes, Mum. And Davies, Mum. Next time you set up an ambush in the boneyard. She smirked. Check the rafters. Everyone forgets to look up. She slid into the car. As the vehicle pulled away, driving past the obstacle course, and the bell that remained unrung, Elena Vance didn't look back. She had done her job. She had cut out the cancer and reminded the next generation of frogmen that the only thing that matters in the dark is the will to fight. Class 284 turned back to the ocean. They were hurting. They were cold. But as they looked at the crashing waves, they didn't see a nightmare anymore. They saw a challenge. They hit the surf. When the ego of a bully meets the quiet confidence of a master, the result is always explosive. Elena Vance proved that true power isn't about how loud you shout, but how effectively you strike. If this story fired you up, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice, grit, and military drama. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never underestimate the underdog. Until next time, stay frosty.